my channel, the best place to be wherever you are on your wealth journey right now. Today I want to talk about good debt versus bad debt, because there is a difference between the two. Some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, hold on a second, isn't debt just debt? Isn't it all bad? But actually, no, it's not, and I will explain that. First though, guys, I will give you a bit of a disclaimer here, and that's that everything I'm about to say is not financial advice, it's just for your information. And I'm definitely not saying here that anybody should get into debt of any kind if it's not within your means. Anyone taking on any sort of debt must have an exit strategy in place, which means you need to know how you're going to pay it off once you've taken that debt out before you even take the debt on. So with love, guys, please don't get into trouble. Okay, so good debt versus bad debt then. Well, part of this is a mindset thing. In the last video, we did talk quite a bit about mindset and how you can actually change your mindset to that of being a sort of good, get yourself into a good kind of mindset around money. But first of all, I need to talk to you about assets and liabilities, because that's where all of the good debt, bad debt stuff really starts. So let's talk about what an asset is and what a liability is then. In simple terms, an asset is something that puts money into your pocket on a day-to-day basis, whereas a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket on a day-to-day basis, or at very least it goes down in value and is worth less later than the amount you paid for it. A good example of a liability is a brand new car, because it goes down in value the moment you drive it off the forecourt. You've also got to do things like tax it, you've got to put fuel in it, you've got to maintain it, and those kinds of things which cost you money, but the car of course doesn't give you any money back. Other examples of liabilities can include things like clothes, holidays and furniture. A good example of an asset, on the other hand, is an investment property, for example, because that should be putting money into your pocket. Providing you've done your research and your due diligence and you've run your numbers before you buy it, then you should be getting an investment that gives you an income every single month. And in addition, it should also go up in value over time as well. And yes, you might have to refurbish it, you might be paying letting agents fees, you'll probably have to pay the mortgage on it, but even after all of those expenses, it should still be putting money in your pocket every single month. And if you've got an investment property that is not doing that, then I suggest you have a bit of a review and see if there's any way that you can make your property work harder for you. Now, I always say that you should only buy the property in the first place if you know for certain that it's going to give you a good income every single month, even after all your expenses. And this is something that I hammer home on our live property trainings. And do stay tuned to the end, because I've got a couple of live property trainings coming up that you might well be interested in. Some other good examples of assets are things like stocks and shares, providing obviously they're going up and bringing you an income potentially as well, and also education, because it's knowledge that's the important thing as well. Okay, so what exactly is bad debt then? Well, on the whole, bad debt is the debt that you've taken out to fund liabilities, debt that you have no way of repaying except by working really, really hard in order to pay it off. So let's look at some examples of bad debt then. How do people actually get themselves into trouble with debt? Well, I've chosen 4 examples of bad debt here, so let's go through them. First off, we have credit cards. Now, this is not to say that owning a credit card is a bad thing, and I'll explain that in a moment. But these little guys tend to get a lot of blame when people get into bad debt. The problem that a lot of people have is that they will use their credit cards to buy liabilities, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. I've used credit cards to buy sparkly shoes, handbags, clothing, all the rest of it, holidays, you know, the lot. And that's all money that we can't get back. It's out of our pocket, we've spent it, and that's that. So the only way that we can get that money back and to repay the card is to work really, really hard to pay it off. And I think certainly the majority of clothes that I bought using a credit card are now in a charity shop somewhere. So you can see that that's not an ideal situation to be in, spending on cards for liabilities. Next example of bad debt is personal loans from banks and building societies. Now, banks and building societies can lend you up to £25,000 per person, and they're usually used to fund bigger purchases like weddings and car deposits and that kind of thing. And yes, I've been there too, because we got a loan to cover our wedding. Next on the list of bad debts, we have mortgages. Now, this might be a little bit controversial here, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, my house is an asset, it's going to go up in value. But the way that I always look at your main residence is that okay, you've bought it and okay, it might go up in value, but there are 2 things to consider here. Number 1 is all the outgoings that you have to spend on it every single month. Things like council tax, your utility bills, maintenance costs and things like that on the property. But then you've also got things like, by the time you reach 65 and let's say you've paid your mortgage off completely, you've got equity in the property, but you can't go down to the shops and buy bread and milk and eggs with the equity in your property. You've got to release that somehow, and the only way you can release it is either by selling your house, which means that you've got then no roof over your head, or to remortgage it and get a new mortgage on the property, which again means getting yourself into more debt. So I would always recognise your main residence, only the house that you live in, mind. I'm not talking about investments just yet, but the house that you live in, that would be a liability. Last example of bad debt that I have for you is loans from friends and family. Now, believe it or not, the Bank of Mum and Dad has become one of the nation's biggest lenders here in the UK. First-time buyers use the bank to fund their deposits on their first properties, and even people going to university will ask the Bank of Mum and Dad for a loan to see them through uni. Now, there was an acronym that came out a few years ago that was bandied around quite a lot, and the acronym is KIPPERS, which stands for Kids in Parents' Pockets Eating Retirement Savings. So you may have heard of that one, you might not have done before. But yeah, kids in parents' pockets eating retirement savings, because that's very much what the parents are kind of feeling about this. And the sad thing is that for the parents, the only way that they can live comfortably into retirement is if there is some way of the children repaying those loans. The problem that many people have is that they take the loans from their parents without thinking about how they're going to actually pay it back in the long run. And I think that's really sad. Now, as you know, I've taken loans from my parents before, and obviously I've paid them back in full, plus a load of interest as well, because I wanted to make sure that they were okay and that they were still comfortable and that they weren't losing any money just because of me. But of course, not everybody thinks like that. Okay, so now we understand a little bit more about what bad debt looks like, let's have a look at good debt then. Good debt is debt that you take out to fund an asset, providing that you've done your research, you've done your due diligence and run your numbers, and you know that the asset will make you more money in the long run than the amount you're spending on it to start with, including the debt. So again, I've got 4 examples of good debt here for you, and number 1 is credit cards. These can be used to fund refurbishments, for example, on your investment properties. Now, providing you've done your research and your due diligence, the theory is that the property will go up more in value and give you a bigger income than it actually costs you to borrow the money on the card in the first place. Now, I'd always say before you use a credit card on your refurbs, make sure that you run the numbers on the property and make sure that everything stacks up. And also, don't borrow on your card unless it's at 0%. That's really, really important. You always want to go for the lowest form of borrowing whenever you're looking at good debt. So in this case, it would be 0% on your credit card. Now, beware, because some credit cards have like 18% APR. Obviously, you don't want to get embroiled in that. Always make sure you're on 0 if you can. Okay, number 2 example of good debt is personal loans from banks and building societies. And again, it works in exactly the same way as the credit card. Your interest rate might be slightly higher than 0%, so it might be 2 or 3 or 4%, for example, on a personal loan. But again, the theory is the same. You would use the loan to fund a refurb project or something like that, and then the property would generate more for you in the long term in terms of income and increase in value. With your personal loan, you definitely want to be looking at the interest rate to make sure that's the best route for you in terms of your investment. Number 3 is mortgages. Now, mortgages on your investment properties should be seen as good debt because technically they are a business expense. They can be offset at least in part against your income tax or corporation tax, depending on whether you invest as an individual or through a company. And just like with your credit cards and loans, the investment should be making you more per month than you actually pay out on the mortgage. And again, if that's not the case, you definitely want to be reviewing your property portfolio. Lastly, we have loans from friends and family. And in property investing circles, we call these guys angels, angel investors. They're really, really important when it comes to starting your property journey because your angel investors can help to fund everything from the deposit on the property to the refurb and beyond. When you first start out in property investing, it might be that your angels are people that are very close to you. So in this case, it will be your friends and family. So it's very, very important that you make them feel safe and secure. In order to do that, you want to write them a loan agreement, get it signed off by your solicitor if you want to as well, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and find out what they want from the deal. Do they want a monthly income, or are they happy to just lend you the money and roll the interest up to the very end when you give it back to them? Before borrowing from your friends and family, always make sure you've done your due diligence on the property to make sure that it's still profitable. So in summary then, debt can be good and it can also be bad. Good debt is used for funding assets. Bad debt is generally used for funding liabilities. The best thing to do in the long run is to build up your portfolio of assets so that they not only pay for themselves, but they also then pay for some of your liabilities. And then you can have the best of both worlds and be financially free. So I do hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Do give me a thumbs up below if you have enjoyed this. And before we go, I will say that I'm running 2 property trainings between now and Christmas. One is in a couple of weeks' time. It's the 23rd to the 25th of October in central London, and the next one I'm doing is next month, the 13th to the 15th of November. And these are 3-day property trainings. They're under the Fielding Financial umbrella, and I'll put a link for you underneath this video in the description. All the events are 3 days, and they're all limited to 18 people maximum per event, just so that we can do all the social distancing and everything that we need to be able to do to keep everybody safe. They're really exciting events, and they're jam-packed with info on how to become a profitable professional property investor. So things like return on investment, where to invest, how to do your due diligence and run your numbers, which, as I've said in this video before, is really, really important, and how to start with absolutely no money. So it's really, really exciting stuff. So do check that out if you can. Thanks ever so much for watching this week, guys. Do have a watch of these 2 videos coming up next, because they will definitely help with your wealth journey. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet as well. Thanks ever so much, guys. Do stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.